Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. Those of you that are here in the chamber, also those watching remotely, we appreciate you being interested enough and caring enough about your government to spend some time with us. If you'd like an agenda for those of you that are here tonight, they're just to the right of the door on a table to the right. I'm sorry. I thought maybe y'all couldn't hear me. Okay. If you have a cell phone or any other electronic device with you tonight, would you please turn it off or to silent? We'll now begin our agenda-setting meeting. No final action is taken at our agenda meetings. Items discussed tonight will be moved to our March 1st business meeting for final consideration. There'll be two opportunities for citizen input. The first will be on our proposed consent agenda, which are items 1 through 7, and then on items 8 through 11 under old and new business. We have one staff report recommendation tonight from our Planning Commission, which is item number 12. And we don't take public input on those planning items at our agenda-setting meetings, but there'll be a public hearing that you can comment on that at our March 1st business meeting if you would like to. Rules of the Commission allow each speaker 3 minutes. There's a light on Ms. Spratlin's desk that will turn yellow at 2.5 minutes, so please have your remarks finished by then so that I won't need to interrupt you. Items on our consent agenda have been reviewed by our agenda team and are recommended for approval at the Tuesday, March 1st meeting. But the mayor or any commissioner can take an item off for discussion tonight. And so this is the time that anyone who would like to comment on our agenda, on our, excuse me, on our consent agenda, would please come to the podium and tell us which number you're speaking to and give us your name and address. And that's for items number 1 through 7. Would anybody like to comment on any of those items? Yes.
I'm Chris Peterson. I live at 698 North Pope Street, and I'm here regarding 197 South Millage Avenue, which is on the corner of Millage and Deering. I'm all for the Deering proposed designation for parking. I think it's a great idea, and I completely understand why residents want it. But my tenants are residents on Deering Street as well, and I think they should have the opportunity, if possible, to have the ability to get parking permits. There are 6 units in that building, and it's basically states that 4 units or more kind of puts it out of the ability to get these permits. So if that could be a consideration, I would greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Peterson. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, we'll come behind the rail. Is there any commissioner who would like to take an item off the consent agenda for discussion?
Yes, Mayor. I'd like to take off item 1.
Okay. Anybody else?
That's all.
Okay. Well, this is the time to comment on our old and new business. So if there are any items, number 8 through 11, that anyone would like to comment on, this would be the time to come to the podium and talk to us about those.
My name is Frank Reeves. I live at 1505 Morton Road, and I wanted to comment in regards to the goals and strategies, hopefully that something that the city can do in regards to what we understand we're going to lose our DSL internet connection, and that we're not in line to have any type of a UVerse connection to replace it. Concern is that it has a tremendous effect on everything from social media to home security to values of the homes, everything else, as the whole world is going to an electronic media, and all of a sudden we find out that we're about to be really put in the backwoods. Living in the smallest county in the state, I would think that AT&T or whoever is responsible for and in charge of providing a service to the entire county would include all of the county. And I would hope that the commission has some type of input to AT&T to avoid us being left out in the cold. Not only this subdivision, but there's one across the street from us. There's another one in less than a mile away that I understand all of these will be excluded from DSL and UVerse. And as I have limited knowledge of alternatives, the alternative that I know of is prohibitively expensive.
Frank, I don't normally ask him I don't normally ask questions for somebody at the podium, but have y'all gotten some kind of a notice or something that you're going to lose the service?
Yes.
From who, from?
If through one of the commissioners and their concern of living in a neighborhood very close that's also going to lose it in their neighborhood.
Oh, it's from a commissioner, but you haven't gotten an official notice from?
I have not.
From your provider?
No.
Who's the provider out there now? Is it AT&T?
AT&T, but very limited in that currently we can't even get DSL because the line that feeds the subdivision on telephones is so overloaded it can't add any other DSL service on it.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to make sure I understood the issue before I let you sit down, and
Right.
maybe the rest of our commissioners too.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Drew Hooks, I live at 915 North Chase Street. I'm here tonight to talk about the living wages that's proposed on the fiscal year 2017 goals and objectives. A living wage of at least $10.17 per hour for all unified government employees, including part-time and seasonal employees, is an important step in reversing our poverty rate in Athens-Clarke County. In addition to the proposed action, I encourage you to pass an ordinance that indexes wages to the cost of living to ensure unified government employees would continue to receive a living wage without you guys having to discuss this each year. Living wages is something that people of Athens care about. I have in my hand right here over 500 petition signatures from people all across the county who say they support their tax dollars going to pay living wages, not poverty wages. Our signatures come from Republicans and Democrats, college professors and students, blue-collar workers, and retirees. When we were in the communities collecting signatures, we had many people say that $10.17 per hour is not enough. They thought our county should pay more. Not only that, people thought all workers should get a living wage, not just people who work for the unified government. Unfortunately, as you know, the state of Georgia has prohibited you from passing a living wage ordinance that would apply to anyone who works in the county. However, you do have the power to ensure that your own employees are paid a living wage. Workers in Athens need a living wage. We have seen the cost of living increase in this community, but we have not seen a rise in our income. Our 38% poverty rate and low unemployment of 5% suggests our problem is we have too many people working for low wages that are too low. By ensuring all part-time, seasonal, and temporary employees of the unified government are paid a living wage, you will send a message to the University of Georgia and to other employees in the county saying you believe it is important to pay our workers enough to live on. You would also provide an example for other cities and counties who would like to do something similar for their workers. Pass a budget that includes a living wage of at least $10.17 per hour for part-time and seasonal unified government employees, and introduce an ordinance that prioritizes living wages for all government employees. The people have said they want their tax dollars to pay living wages. You have the power to make it happen, so please do so. Your employees deserve better. Athens workers deserve better.
Thank you, Drew. I didn't get your last name. Would you tell us?
Hooks,
Hooks.
H-O-O-K-S. Yes, ma'am.
I should have remembered that, but thank you.
Who do I give these petitions to?
You can just give it to Mr. Berryman. We'll,
Thank you, sir.
anyone else wish to speak?
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. Tim Denson, 290 Midway Road. I also want to speak to the FY17 budget goals and strategies. And first off, I want to completely echo everything that Drew just said. I think it's a high priority. But what I'd like to speak to is the strategy of promoting transparency through improved access to information. And I think one big piece of this before, and I know I've talked to most of you guys about this, is to get video and audio recording at the Dougherty Street building where your work sessions are held. And at the very least, have minutes recorded that are available to constituents like myself who am not paid, and make it very difficult to sit through those 3-4 hour meetings. You guys, I understand the struggle. The struggle is real. Those meetings are long. But to show the importance of what's happening in those work sessions, which you guys all know. I mean, I think a lot of times you're deciding how you're going to vote at that meeting based on the information that you're getting in. Once you arrive at the agenda setting, especially at the voting meeting, I think a lot of times you know you're going to vote already because it's been decided at that work session unofficially. And something that former county manager Alan Reddish said at the, I believe it was the October voting session, whenever you guys were talking about the service delivery plan, And Commissioner Neesmith brought up the fact that the public did not know enough about the service delivery plan. It hadn't been public enough. People didn't know. And former County Manager Reddish said, "We have certainly made this public. We had public presentations at your work session. We followed the same process that we've always done." I wasn't at that work session. I bet you 99.999% of the population was not at that work session. We weren't there. We didn't see it. That information was not made available to us. Yet, if there was a video online, we could have watched it. We could have looked into it. We could have shared it on social media. We could have informed ourselves. We could understand where your thought processes were coming from. This is not something that's a crazy idea. This is something that most cities do. They record these meetings. You go to the Atlanta website, you can watch the meetings not just for regular work sessions, but for every single committee they have. An interesting thing was I was one time at the Legislative Review Committee meeting back during the camping ordinance, and I asked for an open records request afterwards of that because I did have a tape player there, a tape player. When I listened and got the open records request and listened to the tape, there was about a 30-second lapse in the middle of it because they had to take the tape out, flip it over, and hit record again. Why? Why is that happening? Why can we not be recording this in the 21st century? The amazing technology that's available and very, very cheap and affordable. Why is that kind of good stuff going on? I'd like to have the information. It's a great way to promote transparency through improved access to information. Please make it a priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Denson.
Hey y'all, Jesse Houle, 436 Hill Street. I too would like to speak to item 8, the fiscal year 17 goals and strategies now. So first, I was pretty worried because, as Tim mentioned, the work sessions aren't recorded, and so I didn't really know what happened, but I heard that all the CDOs are being taken off the table and reworked, and I thought, uh-oh, where's this going to go? But thankfully, the way it came back, I think, was a pretty accurate reflection of what y'all were going for in the CDOs, and so I want to thank staff for that. I think they did a really great job, and I think this bodes well for the future. But there are also a few things that I think don't go far enough. I think one of the things that this county has a habit of doing, the county government, is enacting things through the goals and objectives process. And that can do really great things that year, but it doesn't always set us up for something that's going to be longer lasting. And I'd really like to see more ordinances coming out of these goals and objectives in the coming year. I certainly would love to see a living wage ordinance. I know Drew spoke to that. I know that it's actually over 600 signatures on that petition. Plenty of people in the county agree, a vast majority of them, I would say, that living wages are important, and 1017 is a pretty low bar. So I'd love to see that indexed as an ordinance. But I'm also thinking of other things like the Complete Streets policy, which currently is just a thing that was sort of passed by resolution and uses language like may instead of shall. I think it would be really great if we had more ordinances coming out of these budget goals and strategies so that down the road staff has a clear understanding of what they need to do, what your priorities are, and down the road if there's different people sitting where you're all sitting, those people know what's expected too. So please consider turning some of these things into ordinances in the future. Starting with living wages would be my plea. And also, yes, please start recording those meetings upstairs and especially at the Dougherty Street building, because we have no way of informing ourselves without asking questions or sitting through them also, and we can't always do that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Houle.
My name is Cecil Williams. I live at 295 Blue Heron Drive in Athens. I wanted to address the DSL situation also that was earlier addressed by actually one of our neighbors down the street. I'm president of the Homeowners Association of Shoal Creek Farms. We've got 71 homes in the neighborhood, and we're living in the 21st century in Clarke County, which is we've got UGA here, we've got a lot going for us. What we don't have, though, is 21st century communications. DSL is a 20th century product. We understand, we have been working with AT&T and talking with AT&T really to no avail. But we really need your help in doing something to get our neighborhood and other neighborhoods out in the outlying areas to get better service. We have our last three homeowners, new sales, people have had to wait 6 months up to a year to get DSL service. That's not acceptable for the 21st century. We understand from one of our residents who had a problem with their DSL service has spoken with a representative from AT&T. I do not know the name, so I do not. It's pure say from my part. But that AT&T plans to discontinue or quit supporting DSL in 2018. And that's just around the corner. So something needs to be addressed now. And we can't do it alone. We need your help. And we thank you for everything you can do.
Thank you so much, Mr. Williams.
Hi, I'm Bob Gardner at 480 Millstone Circle and Lot 6 at Thompson Farm. So I want to echo and piggyback on Mr. Frank Reeves and Cecil Wims at Shoal Creek Farms on the DSL opportunity issues and options. I've got a double interest because I've got property at both places. If you roll the two properties together, the value there is about $22 million. And that's a conservative number on that piece. But even as it is today, the service that we do have, it's far under like cities, like counties, like towns, like populations, and not by a little bit, by 10, 20. I mean, just a huge deficit there. So again, just to piggyback on those two, and appreciate your consideration and getting the process started and getting it moved along.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Good evening. Valden Daniel, 1300 Belmont Road. I'm here to talk about item 9. About 5 years ago, my wife and I was relooking at our will, and we decided we were going to distribute property to our children. We have 3 kids. We were going to divide it up equally among the 3 kids. We found out that that was not possible. We could not divide the land up because of it was zoned. So I need your help. So I can keep my family together, not have difficulty with my children. I need to be able to somehow figure out, y'all can help us, figure out a way so I can subdivide or equally divide the property that we presently have so the kids can have something, inheritance that we can leave them out on Belmont Road. Thank you for that consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Anybody else? Okay, we'll come back behind the rail, and we'll start with you, Ms. Dickerson, because you asked to take the number 1 off.
Yeah, I wanted to understand, I'd like to ask our manager to explain to us. Apparently, there was an exemption or exception made back prior to this residential parking permit program, and the exception was made to another apartment complex. And if we could get a little history on that, if he wouldn't mind going through that and explain it, and then I think I'd like to talk about it a little bit.
And I think you're referring to Henderson Avenue.
Yes.
That permit program, the Henderson Avenue permit program, is the oldest in Athens, and it actually began in the 1980s by the city prior to unification, and it's remained unchanged since that time. It's actually covered by its own section of the Code of Ordinances, and we can call that out for you. The first 50 permits are reserved for their use and picked up by a neighborhood representative and then distributed. All properties that have frontage along Henderson Avenue, including the Gamma Beta Pi sorority house, are eligible for the permits. The residents of the small apartment complex, which I think you're referring to, Commissioner Dickerson, owned by John Barrett, are not eligible, to my understanding. And this street has never been brought through the current program. It's a vestige of an older program, Commissioner Sims seems to remember, and it's stayed the same since its inception.
Okay. Well, we were contacted. I assume the other commissioners received a similar request from someone who owns some apartments, 6 apartments on South Millage. who has asked, for some consideration. And, one of the things that after looking at the parking permit program, we do allow, 4-unit apartments to have them. And my thought is, why would we not have some flexibility to offer at least 4 to that complex, and that's a decision I guess we could make, set some parameters if we felt like that was something we'd want to consider. But is there some flexibility for us to consider doing that?
Well, that policy, of course, was approved by the mayor and commission. And the last time, it gets looked at every few years, and most recently the Government Operations Committee came up with those parameters. And I think the thought, I don't know if there's any magic in the number 4, but typically these apartment complexes have fairly adequate parking on site for their purposes. And usually, these areas don't have a lot of on-street parking. These are kind of narrow residential streets. And I think the thought was some of these larger complexes, it might overrun the street. Now, I can't speak to the 6. I think the flexibility, though, I think the ordinances or the policy is pretty clear. And so if we were to relax that, I would expect we would need to go back through the process or at least get the mayor and commission approval for that.
Well, I guess I'd be interested in finding out how many apartment complexes we're looking at that would have 6 or less units. If we're only talking about 2 or 3, I guess I would say, is it that big of a big of a deal to issue 4 to those 3 apartment complexes that might want them? So, Mike.
Yes. No, I don't.
And I'd certainly be interested in that too, because a lot of these smaller complexes were built at a different time. And I think when I was on that committee that looked at that, and I think our concern on that committee, and I forget who else was on there, Jerry, I believe was that that certainly, if you've got a 20-unit apartment complex or even a 12-unit apartment complex, how that would impact the on-street parking there. But I will say this, out of that committee, we also discussed, well, if it's not an apartment complex, but it's an individually owned unit, a townhome that's individually owned, they're still applicable to get the parking permits, from what I remember. And so I guess I'm looking at it from the standpoint 4 to 6. I mean, if there was certainly an opportunity to allow for the 4 on, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out what Commissioner Dickerson is asking.
Well, I think I guess I'm asking 2 things to answer it. I know these other do want to talk, but I guess what I'm asking is how many are there that may have 6 or less? I mean, like I said, if there's only 2 or 3, maybe it's not that big a deal, and maybe we could relax it for that. Or how many, or would we consider relaxing it for those who have 6 units or less, allow them to at least get 4 permits? So those are my questions, I guess.
Jared, you have a comment or a question?
Commissioner Dickerson alluded to some contact about this. Did other commissioners get contacted about this? In what form?
Email.
I did not get such an email, so this is new to me. And I've heard the person get up and make a request, but I'm just curious because it's
new to me too, Jared. So
yep. Okay.
Sometimes all this technology doesn't work as well as we all think it does.
Yeah, I don't think the question is how many 4 to 6 unit apartments there are. I think the question is how much parking is needed by these small apartment complexes. If they have adequate parking already, then there's no need to issue on-street parking permits for them. If they don't, then we have a problem. So I think that's the real question. It's not how many 4 to 6 unit apartments we have, but how much require more parking.
Mr. Gertz.
Just a quick note about the contours of the program generally, because I don't want this to get lost in the discussion. The on-street parking permit program, the Henderson vestige notwithstanding, only covers daytime hours. So evenings and night times are wide open. The permit parking doesn't apply at all during those non-daytime hours. So, certainly if somebody has, gathering, special event, it wouldn't be pertinent. But I think in this location, what a lot of folks have seen is this is a place where during the daytime, people are parking to then catch the shuttle to campus. And so that's been the challenge for some of the adjacent streets that have already implemented this program.
And I think that would be calmed by the parking permit, regardless if we were to offer 4 for this apartment complex or whatever. Certainly, I can see, there's an issue now where if you even don't live on the street or even aren't in these apartments, there's no parking permit, so you're parking there. And I know I'm very aware that that's the problem, but I guess I'm looking at it from a standpoint too of this. Well, there's this property owner, and should they also be afforded the chance to become part of the program in a limited way as well? And these are questions we struggle with in the committee as well. I mean, certainly Commissioner Neesmith brings up adequate parking, and the same question could be asked of, certainly the homes along there. Is there adequate parking there? The purpose of this program, though, is to make sure, as Commissioner Gertz is saying, that, they're applicable to people who live on the street.
It was like a lot of other things we have in our city, because we're an old city.
Yeah.
And our city was built
It's not
for
easy.
very different purposes than we're using it for now. I don't think we can, unless there's a commission found option to do something different, I don't think we can do anything different tonight. We could go ahead and approve this. If y'all want it to go back to committee to study it further from looking at some of these other items, I'll be glad to put it back in committee.
Can we keep it off the agenda just for a bit? See, since we'll vote on it next month. We don't vote on it tonight, right?
Sure. Yeah, we can keep it off the agenda.
Or keep it off the consent.
Yeah, off consent. Yeah, off consent agenda onto the regular agenda. But I think we're trying to deal with some specific problems. It's the reason I said maybe y'all might want to go ahead and pass this, but then put the bigger problem back into committee to be discussed further. Is that something that sounds comfortable to y'all? Allison?
I had a recent ad on the map on Morton, wasn't including a house, and this was a resident that had no parking except on the street. So that's another reason why the residential tags are used, or in neighborhoods that there might just be a driveway. But again, a lot of these older neighborhoods don't even have a driveway. So that's where the origin of some of this has come from. And it specifically says, and I'm not familiar with this Henderson Avenue that is different than the program that I'm more familiar with. It was only for the single family or units because of the parking lots that are with the multiple ones, and they so it could be opening up a can of worms, but by making an overall change for individual situations.
And that's why I just think, if we're considering doing a change, it needs to be done thoughtfully so that you put it in committee and do it without just trying to guess what's the best thing. It'd probably take a good bit of study.
Yeah.
But the problem that was trying to be addressed here on Deering Street for those residents could go ahead and be addressed while the bigger picture was being looked at. But Ms. Bell?
I wanted to clarify about the contact from the constituent that did contact me about this regarding the Deering, because it's in my district. Mm-hmm. The other part that was connected to that, and I did connect to the department about the questions, and of course the rules are the rules are the rules is how I was kind of addressed. The other part was I was also connected when the Deering Street request for the yellow curbing, and that was in the time when my request sheets were stolen, when my house was robbed, so therefore it was all delayed. But I don't think that has anything to do with this part, but I want to mention it just in case any of it cases back in with the discussion that I did receive the contact on that.
And you know what, I think I did too, but mine was verbal, not email.
So. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything else to this? Well, we'll leave this one off leave it off the consent agenda, be on the regular agenda for the next month. Now go to item number 8, which is our budget goals and strategies. Would anybody like to start with that one? Ms. Neesmith.
I just want to address or talk about what some members of the audience have brought up about the declining availability of broadband in the suburban areas. It's true. I mean, AT&T is indeed doing away with DSL, which means if they haven't upgraded the fiber in your area, you're not going to have broadband service. And I have spoken myself with DSL, with AT&T folks trying to get answers to these questions. Where is it? Where isn't it? They won't tell us. And I think as a government, we need to do some lobbying. We need to get some facts. We just need to understand what their intention is and try to get them to do right. We have the same problems in the urban areas where there's no broadband available. in some of the neighborhoods that need it for the education of their children. I have the problem in my own neighborhood where Charter just decided not to put it on one street, and there's nothing there. Everybody else has it, and these 5 houses don't have it. It's just they're not required to provide us with a service. They're not required. That's a misconception people may have, because at one time they were. They are not, and they're not regulated.
At one time, city government regulated the television cable service. I don't know if
That's
we've
right.
ever regulated
The state took that
DSL
away
or
from
the-
us.
Yeah, and that was actually federal government took it away from us. Mike.
Yeah, and I suppose my question would be for the attorney. You know, certainly we pay these franchise fees to these Charters and AT&Ts. Is there something that we could do within those sort of agreements to suggest or even require that they provide these type service? I mean, it's already there now. I guess what the folks are asking for is don't do away with it.
Right. There's the franchises, because of the state and federal laws that have come about in the last few years, there's not a way to do that through the franchise agreements at all.
Is this something that the folks here tonight, perhaps, if they were to, if our state legislatures were to hear about this, is that something that they perhaps could be helpful with in this situation?
I think possibly so. I think they definitely need to know. And it could be also that the Public Service Commission might have some input in it too.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, I guess to answer one of the questions I think Commissioner Neesmith asked was about where their coverage is. I've asked AT&T about that, and they basically are telling me they can't give that information to us because it's proprietary, and that's understandable because we're, the system's been deregulated. But I think the biggest problem and the biggest angst we've had is the fact that we did have this service, and we still have this service. And the only way we found out that they were going to discontinue, and actually the wording that was used with me several months ago when I contacted AT&T was they were no longer going to support DSL. That sort of has a different connotation than we're going to discontinue and take it away from you, even though the service in our area is pretty substandard to begin with. But with that said, I think there are other options. I've looked into them. They are a little bit more expensive. There's some technical questions about how that could be provided. I think there's some concern that we don't need, 6,000 residents in the area that would be affected potentially to have to individually figure this out. I would like, and I'm hoping through the budget process that we can get some money set aside to try to figure this out for the areas of our community that are going to be dealing with this and get on the right side of the 8 ball so we don't end up with not having service at all. I do have a fair number of people in my neighborhood and on the east side that work from home, including myself, along with the fact that I have kids who access the internet both for school and for recreation. So on top of that, we have security systems that are tied to it. So there's a huge amount of issue surrounding this, and I hope I can get some support from the mayor and commission during the budget process to maybe set aside some funds to see if we can at least tackle this issue for a good number of our citizens who are going to be affected by it so that they don't individually have to go out and figure this thing out. Because it's pretty, I consider myself somewhat politically savvy.
Logically.
I consider myself somewhat savvy with computers, and I don't think I've had as much success in getting a handle on this as I felt like I could at this point. So anyway, I hope
think that's
we can
part
get
of the problem. I think it's so beyond most of our.
It's pretty complex, especially when you're dealing with, because you can have landlines and DSL, or you can have broadband or satellites, and it just gets very overwhelming. And I do have a large number of people in my community and my side on this area that we're talking about that are over. The average age of Thompson's Lake is 69 years old. So, thank you.
I just think there are probably only 2 or 3 of us up here that really understand what we're talking about. So. But hopefully I don't even. I'm sorry, Sharon. I don't even understand what you're asking us to do. But we will talk. We will talk about the assistant manager and I will because when you're saying set aside money, I don't know what we're setting aside for a study or to try to provide. But we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll
further.
talk about the budget.
Yeah, it's not a closed issue by any means. So.
I would think too, perhaps maybe this body or our management or the mayor could alert our state delegation about this, and also the AT&T representative who probably is already aware of it about how we realize that this is an important service for residents in our county and needs to be maintained.
Mayor, I'd also like to say, I did speak with our representative, and one of the things that frustrated me about it, and I did share it with him, is he said, well, yeah, we're going to discontinue, it's real competitive, we can't provide service to you. He went on to say, but look at all we're doing in town. We're improving this, we're boosting the service here. It's like, I just want basic service. You don't even have to do all this extra, just give us a basic. And yet, so that's a concern, and that, we're going to get to this probably in this discussion about goals and objectives, but that's some of an unintended consequence of some of our policy decisions in the past that are coming back to sort of deal with those of us that are outside, quote, the loop. We don't know how far-reaching it is. I mean, they may decide they're not going to provide it at all, and everybody has to, I don't know. So it's certainly a concern.
Thank you. Yeah. So hopefully we can at least get to understanding what we're talking about here before too long. So, anybody else want anything else on goals and objectives on number 8?
Mayor, I'd like to offer something.
Yeah, please.
And for the benefit of the public, this is a new process for us. There's a lot of work that went into it, a lot of your time, a lot of staff's time. And this is a document that is meant to inform the budget process. It does not wholly define everything that will happen next year, nor will all the proposed actions on here happen next year. It has to be technically feasible and politically acceptable. There are items on here that we don't have a full consensus of the commission, but there are things that folks wanted to consider. Likewise, with our budget, there's a lot of competing resources or competing needs out there, and we don't have a ton of resources. So in this process, you've done several things, and one is ideas have been put on the table. We've gotten some order of interest and priority from you about what you'd like to see. And we've gone further, and it's a more holistic document. It's not just a selection of several strategies, but it covers the gamut of what this government is trying to achieve and what your vision is for this government, with the addition of some of these normative strategies there that can tell the public what is important and what you're trying to achieve. So I think a lot of good work has been done here, but I do want to temper expectations that all of these proposed actions will happen. That will be, the manager has the prerogative to recommend a budget to the mayor. Certain things will be in there based on what we think we can accomplish. The mayor, of course, puts her own adjustments to that, and then obviously y'all have the last say in that matter. So just to let everybody know, we're going to do what we can. There's a lot of great ideas out there. Some may not get done this year. That might be the following year or year after that. But I think this is a good document and a good start on the new process.
Thank you, Mike. And I'll just mention one thing, because a couple of our audience members have addressed it, and it's been addressed many other times, and that's the living wage issue. And I know Mr. Harrod's very interested in, as is everybody here. But the hourly wage of $10.19, I believe, there are only a few part-time people that are not paid that now, and I think that we all have every intention to bring all of those to that level. But as we do, cost of living raises to all employees year after year, it will affect all the way across the pay scale. So those at that bottom level will also be seeing those increases. So, Mayor, everything doesn't necessarily have to be done specifically by ordinance for it to work. So just want to make that clear. So, anybody else want to? Allison.
I just wanted to be clear. Like you said, we did a lot of work with this, a lot of clicking. On the strategies, you've got them listed by number, and then what's in parentheses is our priority ranking. Is that correct?
That's right, within the entire goal area. I know that's a little confusing.
So each strategy in parentheses is a priority ranking, and then the last 8, what do we have? And then we get to where they're unranked.
Yeah.
Remind me how that list ended up.
Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate you bringing that up. What we did, these 4 major goal areas came out of that first session that we had with y'all and the facilitator about what was important to you. And one thing that was important to you was the efficient, transparent, and responsive government. A lot of those ideas there are administrative in nature. And so we went back to ranking the other proposed actions within the other goal areas. And this is just, there's no ranking to this. This really has a lot to do with changes within the organization administratively that you couldn't be expected to know what those impacts are And you're dependent on us a little bit to make recommendations about what we think is feasible. And certainly it's all in open daylight here, and certainly through the budget process you'll be aware of what our recommendations are. But we felt like, and time being what it was during that session, we left that off, but it's all here for everybody to see.
Okay, I remember now because that was the one that we got to where if we were going to rank it, we needed the dollar amount to do more than just okay. So I remember that.
There was an awful lot of information really required to understand what the impacts were versus the cost.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Neesmith.
Yeah, I hate to get down in the woods again here, but there's a proposed action that is not what the writer of the Commission Defined Option said. And that is under Strategy 1, Economic and Human Cultural Development, the first number 2, realign leisure services. It reads now, realign leisure services program and services resources with community values after the pending auditor's report. I don't need an auditor's report to tell me that leisure services is already overburdened with it's the largest department we have, and natural resources are suffering as a result. My proposal was that we put in the budget the creation of a natural services or natural resources department. So I don't know how the other commissioners feel about this. I'd like for us to be able to talk about this and decide whether we want that to be a budget goal or not.
Well, Commissioner, let me say this too. You made that point at the last meeting, and we went back and looked at the Commission Defined Option that you submitted, and that was not part of that. So that was new language to us. Now, you are correct in that the original wording of that was actually advanced by Leisure Services, and it had more to do with realigning the department and reducing Leisure Services' reliance on general funding through an updated cost recovery program. But what we heard pretty loud and clear is that y'all believed in half of that statement, basically, and that you wanted to talk more about the point you're making about realigning. And so, and I think perhaps Commissioner Wright made the point during our session together that, yes, there's a desire to have some change, but perhaps we ought to let the pending audit report culminate and then make some informed decisions. So that's why you see the language that you see in there now.
Which delays the process an entire year.
Mr. Hamby.
I guess I would wonder, I don't know if it would delay it an entire year based on when you feel like the auditor's report may be able to give us some answers on this.
Well, yeah, I can give a little bit of an update, and of course, Ms. Maddox can correct me and fill in. But we are in the process of having picked the vendor who is going to come and speed up the process with the our internal auditor for this, and I believe it was a 6-week bracket of time.
That's correct, 6 weeks.
This outside help would be coming in to hit this internal audit that we gave the money for, outlined the money for last budget process. And so we've been moving as fast as we can with the process that's laid out for that. And Ms. Maddox, can you fill in as far as the timeline?
For the summer programs?
Well, that one, as well as the one that the vendor's helping us with, which is the whole program, the whole department.
Okay, the summer programs audit, we hope to have that concluded by the end of this month or the first week in March. And the department-wide audit, we hope to start that mid-March. We're right now waiting for clarification from the vendor, and once we receive that, we can sign the contract and get started.
So that I'm hearing you correctly, that one with the vendor will take 6 weeks, and you know I mean that sort of falls right in line with our new fiscal year, so I don't know that that's an adverse effect on what Commissioner Neesmith is asking for. But I will say this: I'm very much interested in what Commissioner Neesmith is asking for,
right.
And I'm anxious to see what the audit report tells us about that.
I know a lot of us wanted this to happen yesterday.
Yeah.
This is a conversation we had a year ago, so I think we're all wanting this to move as fast as possible so that we can have corrective measures.
I'll make sure that we understood, though, you're talking about the larger audit being over 6 weeks time frame.
They estimated 6 weeks.
Okay. I just want to make sure we all understand the right wording. Okay.
And let me also add, Mayor, just with respect to this, I don't want y'all to feel like you're constrained by the language that's in this document. These are proposed actions This was meant just to put a bunch of ideas on the table and talk about them, all at one time, all together. And I think you'll agree, your time together in those smaller groups and discussing what you thought about different actions was useful. Certainly, if the mayor and commission has a different idea and a different timeline for things, that just takes a consensus of the group. This is just telegraphing to the staff and the citizens about what your desires are and what we can possibly accomplish.
Anybody else before we move on? Okay, we'll move on to item number 9 then, which is our Legislative Review Commission's subdivision of single lots in the agricultural zoning district. Is that Andy? I always forget which one's which. Kelly?
I'd be happy to discuss this. And at the outset here, I want to give just a little bit of historic background. People who've been in the community a little while recall that there was a fairly comprehensive rezone and creation of new zoning categories in 1999 and 2000. As part of that process, there was a lot of community dialogue about desire for population density in the core of the community and relatively thin population density on the edges of the community, particularly sort of east and north side and some elements of the west side past the mall. During those discussions around 15 years ago, a series of proposals were laid on the table for what the minimum lot size standard would be, recognizing that, of course, there were some existing lots that were smaller. There were proposals for a continuation of a one-lot opportunity. 5 lots was something on the 5-acre lots was a proposal on the table. There was a proposal for a 20-acre minimum lot size in this outlying agricultural residential zone, but ultimately where the commission landed at the time and where we've been since then is a 10-acre minimum lot size in our agricultural residential zone. Well, along with that, there was also a mechanism put into place so that if somebody had a tract slightly larger than 10 acres, 11 or more, they could peel off a separate parcel once every 2 years of 1 acre in size. So as time has gone on, I've received some requests and queries from the public, and I know Commissioner Dickerson has as well, about what can be done for those people who have parcels smaller than 10 acres. And so that was the question before us in the Legislative Review Committee. What about somebody like Mr. Daniel who's got an 8 or 9 acre parcel in size? Is there any prospect of subdividing that parcel in the manner described? In discussing it in the committee, it became evident that if we were through committee action to create an opportunity of splitting a smaller parcel, essentially what we would be doing is at that point rewriting zoning code and creating a new definition of what an AR lot size is. As the discussion evolved, we came up with lots of questions and prompts. What about the prospect of those who've got just homestead exemption? What about those people who owned a piece of property prior to that 99-2000 comprehensive rezoning? And ultimately, those didn't make logistical or legal sense. At the end of the day, the Legislative Review Committee voted with one exception to pass this out with no action at the moment, but recommend that as part of the upcoming comprehensive plan that we look at the prospect of some new guidelines in the AR district. And what that could ultimately mean is undefined right now. That could mean that there's a new zoning category altogether. It could mean that there's some other array of opportunity within the AR zone. Those of you who've been around a while recall that there was some discussion of transferable development rights in previous times. The prospect exists that there could be transferable development rights even within the AR zone. If somebody wants a smaller than 10-acre tract, they might be able to buy that option if somebody else is willing to have a larger than 10-acre tract, for example. So I'm describing this in future terms because the committee's desire was to say, well, when we look at the comprehensive plan broadly, let's look at this as one of those questions, but let's not engineer this as a micro-level component right now.
And this is something that's to happen this year, so it's not way off in the future.
That's right.
Good. Anybody else want to comment on that one? Thanks. Ms. Dickerson.
So I think we can sort of say without doubt that there have been unintended consequences from this. As I mentioned earlier, the fact that, we've pushed all the density in town. I know Commissioner Wright will probably speak to that. So we've got infill development issues. We have people who have property who have owned it for many years that can't do anything with it in the AR zone. We have housing issues, workforce housing issues. We have no new construction going on in our community, or at least very little. I think all these things are sort of interconnected. And while I, on principle, voted against it, I do think that the proper process is to go through the comprehensive land use plan that will bring everything to the top. Everybody will have an opportunity to speak to it, and as Commissioner Gertz said, maybe have an opportunity to tweak one of our zoning, designations to address this need. But it is a need, and I'm certainly not suggesting, because I love my wide open green spaces out there, I'm not suggesting we're going out and going to just massive develop the green space at all. But there are areas that are currently, sitting, that have been carved out, that aren't being touched. There are people who have we have an opportunity to make some minor adjustments that won't completely change the landscape and keep the character of that area. And I hope that everybody will be open-minded to those as we move through the process.
Yes, ma'am.
Commissioner Dickerson covered what I was thinking as well. In the infill discussion that we're having right now, that also seems to me that it would be appropriate to be having that in the comprehensive planning process, so that we're looking at the whole county and land use everywhere, because we do have a lot of stress in town, and if it's unintended consequences, or if it's just the reality of that's what it looks like 16 years later, and then workforce housing, keeping that in mind too. If we have all three of those topics, I think we're going to get a really diverse group of people involved in that process, and then everybody's going to have a better understanding. I learned a lot during this committee meeting about this, because it's completely different and then I've shared with her the stresses that happen in my district because of the infill. So I think I'm looking forward to that process, and I'm glad it's coming sooner than later.
Yep. Anybody else want to discuss this one? Okay, we're going to. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Neesmith.
I just wanted to point out that one of the big goals we've had in zoning and land use is to push density downtown, and to keep down density out of the greenbelt and out of the AR zone. So we have accomplished what we set out to do many, many years ago, and I'm not ready to change it. That's what we need to do. Continue to do that.
Yes, sir. Anyone else? We're going to item number 10, which, I think if this has to stay on discussion. Item number 10 is the government operations report on the amendment to the neighborhood traffic management program. And that was Mr. Harrod's committee.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is fairly straightforward, I think. After some discussion with David Clark and Steve Decker from our Transportation and Public Works office a few months ago, I asked the mayor to assign this to our committee. The main issue relates to our neighborhood traffic management program, and in particular some of the cutoffs that the current policy has that will or will not allow neighborhoods to participate in that program. And so through the conversation with our Transportation and Public Works staff, it became obvious that if we were to drop the cutoffs just by a little bit, we could significantly expand the number of neighborhoods that could participate in the program. And so what we talked about at our meeting in January was a reduction in the vehicles per day to 500 vehicles per day, and the 85th percentile being 32.5 miles per hour. And if we were to do that, we could get an estimated, I think it's 18 additional streets that could participate in the program. So what we have here is simply a report, I guess, requesting the Commission approve the report, which will then have our staff go back and make the appropriate policy changes to our documents. I do want to stress that this is not the last that I hope that we're going to be talking about neighborhood traffic management program and issues of speeding and pedestrian safety and those kinds of things in neighborhoods, but this is a pretty easy fix, and I think it's I don't see any reason not to do this. So thank you.
Anyone want to comment on that? I would like to just suggest one thing to you, Andy, is when y'all look at it again or before it comes back to us, is to get input from the police department, because that was one of the reasons that I put this into committee, that we had a circumstance where a street did not qualify, but our police staff felt like it would have been beneficial for them to have had some traffic calming on that particular street. So that might be one other condition that could be added, that if they didn't meet the criteria, that police input, that it was for public safety purposes, might push them over the threshold. So if y'all would look at that, I would appreciate it. Anybody else before we move on? Okay.
Can we put this on consent?
I don't see any reason for it to not be consent. Anybody have a problem with it? Okay, Jean? Okay, item number 11 is the East and West Dougherty Street restriping project. Mr. Gertz.
Dougherty Street.
Y'all signs are messing me up. I know your names, but it seems like they're all shifted too farther. I was about to call you Miss Wright.
We could wear some head signage or something as well.
Yeah, with blinking lights.
Yeah, we'll look see what we can find tonight. So Dougherty Street forms the southern boundary of my commission district, and it's a block from my home, and so I've spent quite a bit of time traversing the street, walking it, traveling it via bike, foot, and motor vehicle, and I've often had the perception that Dougherty Street has become in some ways a de facto north downtown bypass. You see very fast moving traffic along Dougherty Street. And in addition to the fast moving traffic being an impediment to safe pedestrian crossing, it also in some ways has cut off those properties north of Dougherty Street from the core of downtown. And I think this realignment of Dougherty Street is going to do a couple of things that are going to counter both of those. I think it's going to be positive for pedestrian activity. If you're on Dougherty Street, you see any number of people crossing near the Denny Tower, where under this proposal there's going to be a flashing beacon, or you see crossing at Jackson Street as they're approaching Lay Park or the Linden House, or they're coming to work in the morning, or coming to downtown for dining and entertainment at night. And so this is going to increase safety. The data about this kind of realignment simply is consistent. It is an enhancement in safety. And I think significantly, in addition to that, really what it's going to do is weave the fabric of that northern component of Dougherty Street, which really is part of downtown, into downtown. And Dougherty Street will become much more like Hancock is today, where you've got this consistent flow of activity from Clayton to Washington to Hancock to Dougherty and beyond. And so I think this is going to yield positive dividends for our downtown and our community in many ways. And now it's not a project without some challenge, and I've certainly gotten some phone calls and emails that wonder, well, is this going to make it more difficult to get into downtown? The traffic management studies would indicate that it's not going to have any significant deterring effect on getting into downtown, but again, will make it safer and will make it more beneficial for all those properties on the north side of Dougherty Street.
Anybody else want to say anything about this one? No. It's right.
I do. The area on page 61 in our packet, it would be number 5, and it's talking about the parking space dimensions, and that they're giving have space for a little more generous spot, 11 feet by 25, so that somebody has time to get into the spot. And the regular dimension is 8 feet by 20. And I was hoping, I think I brought it up at the work session, I was hoping that there could be some mark to show that 8-foot part. I think people will try to park closer to the curb if there's a mark to do that. But if the mark is 11 feet out, I don't know that it's going to accomplish the goal of the drivers opening their doors in that buffer. And so I was hoping that we could have a mark that would be to park in, that 8-foot part. So they'd have that space, but otherwise I think they're just going to park right at the 11-foot mark, and then the doors being opened into the traffic, which is the idea is for it not to.
Traffic engineers probably been watching the Mayor Park parallel.
So anyway, and I guess it could be something that if it becomes a problem, because remember how we've got those
I
hash
understand,
marks at
yeah.
the end of the trucks now that are sticking out and they get a ticket? So I think we're going to end up with a little bit of a problem here if we don't mark it to encourage the parking to be as close to the curb as possible.
Could we ask our traffic engineer to look at that for us?
Yes, we'll give you a response on that.
I think that he had said it might cost a little bit more just because of more marking, but it may, anyway, I would like to find out if there's a way to do that to help closer to the curb.
Anybody else want to speak to that one? Yes, Mr. Sims.
This will be a minority report, but that's okay. Changing Dougherty Street to the configuration that we have here, in my opinion, this is just me thinking out loud, we are looking at putting 72 parking spaces there at the cost of $500 a parking space, which is a little over $35,000. And of course, the assumption is that people will park there, they will pay their money, and we will recover that for X amount of time. When we had the little kiosk that was placed in the middle of the block down on Broad Street, we quickly changed that from the kiosk back to individual parking spaces because people had a problem of walking up to the kiosk, getting their little stub, walking back to their car, and placing it in the window because that created a problem. Now, we think that we are going to take 72 parking spaces and move them over on Dougherty Street, and people are going to park and then walk all the way over here, even if they had a problem just walking a half a block. Now, as Mr. Gertz stated, you know, Hancock does not carry the traffic that when he said that, you know, it kind of become like a Hancock Street. When 14,000 cars a day are going to come through a street that we are going to bottleneck down, it generally, you know, just put it in your mind, here's this line of cars that'll have to ingress and egress Athens, Georgia every day because, as Mr. Gertz stated, this is kind of the de facto exit of getting out of Athens-Clarke County. So we generally are going to take these people, once they figure this out, and move them into different neighborhoods where they will find another way to get around coming up Dougherty Street because we want to be where we need to be when we need to be there. And of course, this changes our normal anticipation. Like I said, this is just me thinking out loud. And so as a result of that, we'll get what we have on Hawthorne. From Apps Road to Oglethorpe Avenue, that is the biggest mess that we've ever had. And we just talk about how wonderful it is. I pay my cable bill. I like to go to the store. See, most of my colleagues pay online. I like to go and come out and sit and wait till the traffic line that flows down Hawthorne until they finally get a break in traffic to get out so that I can go wherever I'm going. But that's what happens there. I'm surprised that we haven't had someone killed at Old West Broad and Hawthorne, where we have a double line, 2 lanes, and then all of a sudden, oops, we've got to make a left turn. Make a right turn onto Old West Broad because we thought we were going to go down the street. And, you know, some of the things that we do sometimes aren't the most logical. But like I say, this is just my thought about how this will impact. And, you know, we're going from 4 lanes over here, right on Prince Avenue, and then all of a sudden, you know, we do have the turn there, but it does dovetail into a 2-lane street for 2 sets of traffic to go up. Moves traffic pretty fast. So I'm just wishing us well as we go through this. Now, the recovery of the $40,000 almost dollars for those parking meters, hopefully in 2 or 3 years, we'll have recovered the amount of money that we hope that they're going to be putting in there if we have people who will actually park on those parking meters. That's my comment.
Thank you. Mr. Gertz?
I appreciate Commissioner Sims' input, and certainly I think what I want to make clear is that Dougherty is fairly dissimilar from Hawthorne, both in terms of the traffic counts and its use. I think anybody would recognize that particularly the part of Hawthorne you referenced by Old West Broad really is a bottleneck, and there are close to 20,000 vehicles a day that are in that segment versus 14 here. In terms of people's willingness to walk to parking, they're willing to park in front of my house another 2 blocks away and walk to downtown every night of the week. So I don't see a problem with anybody parking on Hancock or on Dougherty Street here and walking to City Hall or to the 40 Watt Club or to any number of establishments. So I'm looking forward to this transition. I think it's going to be healthy.
Thank you. Anybody else?
And this may have already been said, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but when somebody mentions parking meters, I sort of perk up and go, "Oh, what's going on?" I don't know why that is. The mayor and I both act that way. But the thing I wanted to point out is, and I understand the concerns that Commissioner Sims is bringing up. Certainly, I do. The thing I'd like to point out, though, is looking 5 or 10 years down the road at what this street could look like as far as expanding the downtown sort of shopping, retail, office, work sort of atmosphere. And y'all know we're working, and it's on our agenda tomorrow at the Downtown Development Authority about the RFP for in front of Indigo Lot, and certainly there's some development going on next to the planning department. And those are the things I'm looking at, is how you can extend the downtown feel of downtown into that area as well. And I do understand the concerns about the investment in the parking meters. There's 70 parking meters at $500 a pop. I will say this, though, that when we talked about the investment in parking meters down by the Standard, we had that request come in to us, and we realized that I think there were 40 meters there that we were going to be purchasing, and those you will recapture the investment in that after 6 months, which is a pretty good return on your investment there. So, and I think, especially since if we're looking 5 or 10 years down the road, if we're looking for activity on that street to increase as far as the development, not only in the apartment complex there next to planning, but also what we're trying to do with the RFP in front of Indigo, there's going to be a need for parking to service whatever sort of business may want to go there. So there's that to think about as well.
Ms. Harrod.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I certainly hear what Commissioner Sims is saying, and I looked at the comments that we got from the public hearing, and a number of people mentioned about, what would this do for speed of ambulances and those kinds of things. But I seem to recall, and I certainly stand to be corrected, but I seem to recall from our work session when we talked about this, our staff was talking about, if there is any additional delay of moving through the corridor, we're only talking about a couple of seconds or so. But do I misremember that? I mean, we're not talking about a really long time.
I thought I remember 4 seconds or something.
4, is that what it was?
It wasn't appreciable. I don't remember the exact number, but I can find that out.
Okay. I guess what I'm saying is I think that's worth it for the benefits that this will bring.
Well, my biggest reason for supporting this is the public safety of pedestrians, particularly with that senior high-rise there. I've seen so many times when you'd see somebody that's obviously a resident there that starts out 2 or 3 times and goes back because they're afraid to try to get across the 4 lanes of traffic. And I think I've mentioned y'all, I go to First Presbyterian Church, and I parked at parking lots on that side. And with that hill and the speed of traffic, it's really scary trying to get across the street. So, Mr. Hammond.
If you don't mind, I would like to add my sort of concern that Commissioner Wright brought up, especially, on this stretch of parallel parking. Most of our other parking downtown is angled, so it's easier to back in and get out of. But I would sort of be interested in, I know the wider spots will make it easier to get into the parallel parking so that the mayor can make sure she's in the spot real good.
You hope.
And yeah, we hope. so that, but certainly anything additional that could be added to it would be helpful.
Those spots are actually going to be longer and wider.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
so people like me ought to be able to do it. We'll see. I'm not very good at parallel parking.
I don't, parallel parking's not I failed that in my driver's test, so I'm surprised I got my license.
Anybody else want to talk about item number 11? Are y'all happy for it to go on consent? No. Okay, we'll leave it on discussion. Get up. Mr. Griffin, will you come talk to us about item number 12? We don't need our screen tonight, so I won't have to move.
Okay. We have one text amendment this evening. It's a series of text amendments, but this was actually one that was brought forward and initiated by the staff. In an attempt, there was a response to try to address what we were seeing as a growing number of variances for the size of accessory structures, variances requesting larger accessory structures than the code normally allows. Currently, we allow a 25% maximum on up to a total of 3 buildings for accessory structures in the residential districts. Seeing a lot of variances, we began exploring with the Planning Commission some options for larger numbers, perhaps setting a minimum regardless of the 25% is based on the size of your principal structure or your house. Maybe looking at establishing, regardless of your home size, a minimum allowable accessory structure for any residential primary use, and then increasing the percentage from 25 to another number. This has been in the Planning Commission at a discussion level for about 3 months now. We've been anywhere from 30% to 50%. There was never really a comfort level of going more than 50% on the across-the-board increase in size. But where they ended up landing with it for your consideration was to go to a allowable 600 square foot accessory structure for any single-family or two-family residential primary use, regardless of the size of the house, and then increase from 25 to 50%. Now, where this will get you, we started at 500 on the square footage. They went to 6. A 500 square foot accessory structure would give you a pretty comfortable 2-car garage with some additional storage, 25 by 20 in terms of a footprint, as a by right for anybody regardless. A lot of your post-war homes in some of our post-war neighborhoods are 13, 14, 1,500 square feet, and if you start looking at simply 25%, you start getting into a restriction to where really even a freestanding 2-car garage, and many of these houses were built without garages during that time period, is too large to be built. Or if they've got one that needs to be remodeled or removed and rebuilt, they could not. So that was the reason for going to the 600, give everybody that opportunity. The 50%, yes, there's been some concern, and it was discussed, and I think it's reflected in the pink sheet discussion at Planning Commission by one of our members. 50% on a large principal structure could allow a large accessory structure. If it's a 4,000 square foot house, you could have a 2,000 square foot accessory structure, but keep in mind that all these pieces kind of work together to form, the puzzle's everything's got to work in it. So largely, if you've got a 4,000 square foot house, it is normally going to be in one of our larger lot residential districts. With the zoning ordinance, generally the larger the lot, the more reduction in overall lot coverage you can have. So for an RS-25 zoning district, which Westlake Drive, for example, is largely RS-25, it's a 25% lot coverage. So even though you may have a larger house, which would give you the ability to construct a larger accessory structure, you can still only cover 25% of your lot in total with impervious surfaces. So any structures, obviously, your driveway, your sidewalks, all of that can only add up to 25%. So I think where that really pushes is that, yes, there may be some opportunities to build larger accessory structures with the 50% number, but I think they are generally going to be also on larger lots that can more than likely accommodate that larger structure. Also, there's a 3-foot setback allowance for accessory structures on your side and rear yard. It's really not a huge change from what we already allow for the principal. I mean, a principal side yard setback is 6, so it's only a 3-foot difference there. It's 10 feet on a rear property line, but there's also a 15-foot maximum height allowance on an accessory structure that is utilizing that 3-foot setback on either. So if they're going to go taller, then they meet the primary structure setbacks. So it's something that Planning Commission's asking for you to consider. The only other thing I want to mention, there's been a lot of discussion that in some way this amendment may affect those allowable uses as accessory structure. That's not what we started this as, and there's nothing in this amendment that would in any way loosen or provide opportunities for more things to be accessory structures. And what is coming out of that largely is accessory dwelling units. That may be another discussion for another day that we need to talk about, but this amendment would not free up in any way the ability to do an accessory dwelling that can't be done now. So with that, after 3 months of discussion, it was a unanimous vote of the Planning Commission for you to consider. And just as one more reminder, with text amendments, your two options at your voting meeting are either to approve or deny. If you deny it, and we've done that recently on another text amendment, you could deny with direction. If you wanted to make modifications to it that you felt like were above and beyond something you could do as a defined option, you would simply deny and return it to the Planning Commission for further consideration with some more specific direction if that's what you wanted to do. But right now, the recommendation is to approve with unanimous vote.
Any questions for Brad? Mike?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I think Brad's pretty much answered it, but I'm going to state it back to you to make sure I'm clear with it because I've had several questions on this. So as an example, Commissioner Bell owns a 4,000 square foot house. It's a big one. And then she wants to build it. She has enough land to where she can build a 2,000 square foot structure. But if she doesn't have enough land, then that 2,000 becomes limited. So there's other things in there, as Commissioner Kimmons pointed out, that sort of factor in, at the end of the day, what size structure Commissioner Bell is going to build. But say she can build the 2,000 square foot structure, she has enough land there. She can't build a 2,000 square foot structure so that Commissioner Harrod could come live in it. Is that correct?
Unless he chooses not to have a kitchen and she cooks for him, yes.
Which may be possible.
Which may be possible, yes.
Yes. So, okay, because I know those of us that are in the area of, especially with, and I guess we were getting concerned about it because we know this infill stuff is coming up, and certainly I was concerned about how that would play into that part of it, but I know that would be a big concern for some of the folks that Commissioner Wright, Commissioner Bell, and I represent. So as long as we could keep Commissioner Harrod out of the accessory structure of Commissioner Bell, that means you no cooking allowed. So, all right, thank you. That answers my question.
The issue of accessory dwelling versus guest house is a permitted use as an accessory structure in these zones, but guest house is also defined as a structure without a kitchen. And the kitchen is kind of that's kind of the issue with whether it is or it isn't. And, that's been something that has kind of been discussed off and on for as long as I've been here.
So for somebody like me who doesn't cook and who doesn't know if his oven or oven, it's called an oven, works, then and all I use is a microwave, I would be able to live in her accessory structure. Is that correct?
Yes, you would.
Not without her permission.
Not without her permission, but yes, you
I
would.
thought Jim Thompson did put this all in the paper tomorrow.
I think he's going to have fun.
Should that not be a concern to us, though? I mean, should that not be a concern to us of situations like that?
Well, I mean, I think the only thing you're changing from what we already have is the ability to do a larger. I mean, what she could have now with her 4,000 foot house is 1,000 square foot second dwelling without a kitchen versus a 2,000 square foot. I think the issue of to have or not to have accessory dwellings in our single family zone is probably another larger policy issue that really starts to spin into the comp plan again. And it's always been an issue with accessory dwellings in college towns primarily is it's not the person that initially builds it and lives there and has a rental in their backyard to help supplement income or mortgage. It's when that property sells, it becomes very valuable as an investment property with two rentals instead of one. And how you regulate that is something that, yeah, that's a community discussion that needs to be had later.
And I think for this purpose too, I know we're all going to think about this. We need to factor in what it looks like from the neighbor's point of view and how that's impacted. So.
Did you ask to say?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to add that one of the reasons I appreciate this modification is because a lot of the complaints are, why are these houses being torn down in the older neighborhoods? And it's because of changes in the family or changes in needing more space. And so when you can keep that house and the curbside appeal, and what you've done is you've modified and made another dwelling or another area in the back where somebody can have it for their hobby or a guest to visit, because you can't really build on another bedroom on the house. So it allows people, what I think and what I've seen in my district, is more flexibility and desire to stay where they are, which means they're putting money in the house, they're putting money in the accessory building that might they be to a point where they want to have a covered place to get in and out of their car that they don't have now. And then to me, it minimizes that becoming a tear down, because everybody's putting more into it there, and it becomes more valuable as it is, as opposed to becoming a tear down and then a totally different look.
Just briefly, I'm supportive of this text amendment. I really think the height limitation and lot coverage limitation that are already in our code are going to be the factors that mean that this doesn't produce these over-prominent structures in people's backyards or side yards.
Okay. Anybody else? Ms. Terry?
Question that just kind of comes up. What about for these kinds of structures that would be in a historic district? Would they still, this doesn't affect the...
Does not affect their process. They would still require a COA.
Anybody else? Okay. Mr. Bailey.
Not related to this issue, but I've got to make an apology. I would have sworn that I did not get the email that I said I did not, but through the miracle of modern technology, Mr. Peterson was able to message me, and indeed I did get that. It just slipped my mind, so I must apologize.
So that made two of us. So join the club. Okay. Y'all ready to go home, guys?